Hey everyone, hope everybody's doing well, blessed, and enjoying family. As always, gracias to all for everyone's words, wishes, prayers, as the love and support everyone sends my way. From the heart, I appreciate every one of you. Also, do please help support the message by liking, sharing, subscribing, and hyping the video. Gracias. Bueno, everyone. Like I have stated before in other lives, I do want to get into, different situations with different homies that were from Northern California. You guys know I don't like to stay in one area a lot, so, but I think it's important uh, to put it out on the message because it entails a lot of the wiggles inside, right? There's a lot of he said, she said on a lot of things that are basically not true. But, anyways, this one's going to circle around a homie, Toppo, from Bagos, Salinas, right? And or some, excuse me, I should say, of his wiggles with Mike, or Boo from Norwalk, right? La Senora. And just to take you back, it was between 2009 and 11. Excuse me, I can't remember the exact year, but it was in between there, right? It's when the homie's name started reaching ears, right? He started doing things on the linea, and they were all correct. He was holding down positions, jardines, and where there were certain issues where he addressed them correctly, went through the proper steps. And for those who know, Mike, he was real respected when it came to state and federal, right? And he was in the Central Valley a lot, you know, with a lot of different camaradas. But in this case, just to put a little history on the homie, the homie Placaso was Pelon. Casares was his last name for those that are from that area who know what I'm speaking of, right? He would end up catching a double murder, right? Which is pretty much something you don't really look into, right? Or at least a lot of vatos don't look into. They look at it like, oh, from the gate, just because of the case, he's solid, right? Nobody presses an issue. It is what it is, right? And basically, the homie went through YA. He got a little clecha on there, and then he will move up to the system, right? I'm not exactly sure what year he got transferred to the system, but again, between 2009 and 11, his name was reaching up there. You know, there were certain events that Mike and Terco, Psycho, Smooth did in the valley. When it came to Wiggles, so they needed work. So it's how you could say I got caught up in between. Plus T say, hey, this is a homie from your area. Keep in touch. Pégale un ojo. In the sense of just guard what he's doing. He might be a good asset to do things with. Because again, it was all positive, right? And one time there was an incident with Judas. This was in Kern in the 180, right? Because again, his local life, I guess he served one in YA, then they send them to prison, right, to serve another one. And in Kern, I guess when it came to the COs, they were being real disrespectful. The Omi had a position there, and he was being allowed to answer to Mike, right, in the sense of whatever he was doing. He would pay his respects to T, and but at the same time, everything he did was for his deal, right? And it was understandable. Again, T gave that flexibility, right? And anyways, push came to shove, and when I say it was really about it, it was he he was a fool. He was a real fool. There have been a couple issues. For example, somebody had to be taken care of in Corcoran Shoe after that incident, and he took care of it, right? And it was a time where the dog cages, and it ain't easy. First off, to finesse it, to get next to them, and then finesse it to get what you're going to use out there, and to convince the individual it's a lot more difficult than when we had group yards. You just go out, you start presenting yourselves, taking bisas, and when it's time to boogie on someone, you boogie, right? Here it takes a lot more mind to be able to touch someone. When they started doing, when they did the cage system, right? Not gonna call them dog cages because I feel that's like disrespectful, right? But it's when they separated everyone, and we were coming out to cages, and we still did our program routine, whatever, but it was different, right? You know. And anyways, I caught. I'm not gonna say I caught. We went out there, and one time before I left Corcoran, before I cut that case, but it was still not in function. I left Corcoran, it was still group yards. So, anyways, however he did it, he did it. You know, he would end up doing them shoes right there, and he would end up getting kicked out to Salinas Valley. He's a shoe kick out lifer, so he's going to a 180. And up in Salinas, there was a lot of chaos. I stated it before. There was numerous appeals one in that yard, and to be sincere, that Mesa system, I know a lot of people glorify it like, okay, so you got five individuals working for five different Pilis, a lot more things will get done right. But it wasn't like that, because everybody was always bumping heads. For example, you had five individuals holding the mesa, okay, but one of them five individuals guarantees going to consider he has more juice, he has more power than the other four, and he's going to be pushing to be crossing up. Instead of working as a team, he's going to try to cross up the other camaradas to prove himself to a senor he's representing. And it happened throughout the system, at the times. Sometimes there was two of them grouped up against three, or however it was. It was always chaos though, because you gotta remember it's five of them, yeah, but them five, they picked up their people that they helped, that had them help them, so it became like ramflitas, little groups of camaradas that were on their own trip. And basically, A lot of homies can't say nothing of it because a lot of them, they're doing them. They're not plugged in like that. At this moment, the shoe was still a permanent thing. If you were validated, locked up in the shoe, you were never going to get out of the shoe. There was no sight for it to come out, right? 2011 is when you started hearing them start really rocking on that program, right? The shoe program. But before then, nah. For example, myself, I was dead set, that I was gonna spend the rest of my life back there doing my shoe, in that cell or in whatever cell. It didn't matter. And then the day it's all the same, right? But anyways, another reason why I'm touching on this camarada is to prove or to show an insight on how a lot of vatos skate. For example, someone asked me like, "Hey, can you speak about this individual?" And I said, "No, I'm not gonna speak on him." But his wiggles is something you could reflect, right? An insight on him. Homeboy killed someone by accident on the street. It wasn't his intention. He just wanted to be panchero. That's a fact. He hit the county. From the minute he hit the county, he's straight tails. But the other cats busted with him also tailed on him. So of course the camaradas don't look at him in that sense because he's being told on. So he's caged by the county. You know, you hit prison and a smart individual, we should say a snake, right? Knows that them statements of nation to the Judas, they don't come out in your 128G. Your 128G is gonna basically dictate your some of your crimes, your C files, since you've been in CDC, but it don't go into detail when you sat down with the detectives in the beginning, right? So you were able to skate by. I could imagine though, you're trying to play a part, but that's always behind your head. Hey, I told, because you can't be that dumb, especially if you've gone through YA, right? And yes, to those that ask me, whatever you do in YA, it carries on. It follows you, especially if you're a snitch, if you're ratted. The only way is like someone else, right? That ratted in YA came to the system and skated through because the fool he ratted on basically was an opposite and they didn't get along with nobody. You skated through, even though there was a lot of norteños that knew the truth about you. You still, you had that look. That's exactly what it is, luck, right? But getting back to Topo, right? Again, he went from Corcoran to Salinas. He got a seat for Mike, right? And I'm not gonna say there's set trip. There's set trip in politics, regardless. You know, you're always keeping a guard up with the next individual, even though you're working with them. You know, and it has nothing to do with where you're from. It's basically, you pick up on anything to be sincere to feel some type of way about someone. It's just you gotta outshine them. You know, that's how everything works. But this homie got into some conflict, right? with another individual that was representing at the moment one of the Ayalas in Salinas, and basically it got put up to the higher ups, like Umaquique. We let them handle their business. We make it a bigger thing or what, and the homie Toppo said no. We'll take care of it like Sureños. Just give us the green light to do so. And homeboy and the other homeboy went in a sale and they handled their business, to put it aside. After that, it was not to be spoken of no more. That's why they got the green light. Put your problems aside, keep working, don't get caught. Whoever gets caught, this straight came from the Bay, right? Whoever gets caught, if you do get caught, you're done. They didn't get caught. They kept pressing and pressing, and then over debt. That's always, there's always a straight dope fiend among the tecatos, and he tends to sit. And I don't think it's done on purpose, even though in a lot of occasions they know their family ain't going to do it no more for them. They still ask and ask and ask to get high and to free from it. So they know what the outcome's going to be, right? I'm not sure about this case again. I was already slammed. Everything was, well, not everything, but at least what had to be reached to Terco, I was seeing if it was important enough to get it to him, right? If it wasn't important enough to bother him, then I went ahead and answered, properly. And of course, I would later on address it to him, right? And, anyways, over a dope thing, somebody sad and old already too much, you know, he was the one they were asking him to front. And yeah, it was another camarada from Salinas, you know, I believe he went by oh, I'll come to me right now, sorry. But anyways, Toppo and him, they knew each other from the streets. He wasn't from Bagos. I think he was from La Posada. Gato, if I'm, yeah, Gato. And again, he liked to use, there is a lot of that, there is a lot of Tecato homies, right? That they use, but there's a lot that are responsible in the sense that I met homies that like to get high, but they know their limits, To them, their career is worth more. And then there's those that allow the gorilla to really put them on the hole and they go way out. To not make it long, Toppo would end up hitting hitting Gato, whacking him for the dead. And Gato was through, you know. I'm not really sure where he went after Salinas Valley, to be sincere, but he was through because Toppo was holding MS money. So basically, Gato owed directly to the MS, so there was no coming back from that. But anyways, I think Toppo in his head he thought he was gonna hit Corcoran again, right in the shoe. But CDC was gonna send you wherever they feel like it. It's a lie that if you've been to Pelican Bay once, you're always gonna go back. That's not true. CDC could decide from one moment to the next. You've been to the Bay too many times, you're going to Tehachapi or you're gonna go to Corcoran. That's a myth. You know that you went under I'll just say, it's embarrassing to even go up to the bay for getting caught with the peas. That's like you usually go up to the bay for doing something right, for have been doing things right and squad caught on to you, but for getting caught with the peas numerous of times, that's just, I'm surprised, I'm surprised it lasted as long as it did, but anyways, you would get it sent up to the bay, and that's a fact that in the system at this time there were so many rumors in the bay. If you had not been there, you get there and they're going to check this, they're going to check everything from your juvenile hold days. They used to say you needed to get your paperwork from your juvenile hold days, from your first bus to your YA days, prison days, and all these myths, right? How the Billies handled new arrivals. So of course, if you got something in your closet that you're hiding, we seen it with certain persons, right? They get up there and then they're stuck. You know, they're stuck, and because Toppo would end up getting validated in the hole in Salinas, and it was all behind. Like I said, everyone's telling kites being given to the Judas with his name, a birthday card of someone up there that circle around all the homies was given as a point. It was just nothing relevant, right? But IGI, that's how it was doing things. And he went up there, and then he lasted not even a month. I'll be honest with you. Not even a month before he tapped out, and to me it was a surprise. First and foremost, because there wasn't that many homies from Northern California in the system as it was. There was, but in the lower levels, San Jose, Santa Cruz, Richmond, from the town, everywhere. But in the 180s, especially doing things like that in the shoes and stuff, there weren't too many of us, you know. So I was surprised in a month I got, and I'm appeals telling me so, Hey, Toppo, he checked in. He tapped in with the COs when he went out to medical and never came back. Again, right away, the COs was gonna come back and tell you, hey, homeboy Casares right there, he's going into that program to start telling, because there shouldn't be no doubt, right? Even a person that at one point had a position in the Amen has said it himself, on YouTube. There's no way around the way you debrief. It's only one way, or you don't. But anyways, later on we would find out why he had locked it up. A different camarada from Salinas drove up, and he was asked about Topo Casares, and he was like, "Huh? I don't know no Topo," and he said he was gonna check on the streets, and nada. Homeboy had been down since the 90s. Again, he went through YA and everything, and he had a he had a good stilo to him, according to all those that I spoke. He had good mind on him and everything. Just again, you get misled on the streets, right? And his real placazo was Wizard from Los Vagos 13. His last name was Casares. The homie that got up there from Salinas would end up getting the paperwork right. And what happened was he was young, I guess, and they had put in some work, on norteños, and no disrespect with that. And they would end up taking one's life, right? A couple days later, they rushed into our house that they thought it was a norteño, and in the means of it, the shooting killed a 5-year-old boy. And even though it's a no-no, he skated through, Again, his 128G did not state everything. It stated double murder, right? But unless you have people that ask for your court transcripts, they skate through, But it's funny how the head play games, in many different ways. He got up there and then he had all these thoughts on how Pelican Bay work with new arrivals. And I'm sure that's what happened with that other individual, After 4 months, he seen the rope there waiting for him, right? From what he was hiding. And he checked in, you know. As far as I know, not to that extreme, right? That getting the SEAL's ears and, hey, I want to check in. My life's in danger, but you got to take me out to the back because they're going to spear me. That's, that should tell you all, For that same person to later say, oh, I didn't snitch in the debriefing program. Come on. Everything has been clear water, You started telling since the county. You were never around Billy's, señores, carnales, even though you want to give them this name that for some reason makes you feel secure, which is more power to you, but it ain't going to hold them, But that's why in the transfers, any little mistake, you were on it, right? Whining and crying how your life was in danger. But that's exactly what happened with Topo Casares. He allowed his mind to get to him and he locked it up. Which, I'll be sincere with everybody. If he would have hit up there and maintained just with his 128G and had not had any problems with camaradas that drove up there that wanted to earn a name or would end up pulling that paperwork on him from the streets, he would have been up there cool. But then again, the fear factor of being back there for life, right? It hits hard. Believe me, I've been there and you gotta learn how to make peace with it. And they don't come from one second to the next. Like I said, I did most of my time in the hole, shoes, and arriving at Pelican Bay with the double life sentence validated. It's different. It hits different. For those that been there would understand. But anyways, that's a story I want to share with you guys today. When people say, oh, they skid through, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of camaradas in the system that have funny stuff on their stuff, but that are put up either on game by older homies. Cause neighborhoods homies could say, you might have some homies from your neighborhood that they will really go out their way to, hey, you're no good. I'm gonna whack them right through you. But most of all, the homies from your neighborhood, they're gonna ride it out with you to see if you skate through to you know, to have you in the system to say like, hey, my barrios, it's out here, right? It's just a pride thing. And like I said, there's a lot of vatos that have that, that know how to work the system in prison, which is it's real rare. The camarada that has a yard that's going to ask you for your court transcripts. When they get to the shoe, they're going to ask you for your 114 lockup order, your 128G, and then a personal inlight by yourself on how things occurred. And you clear those things, you pretty much clear, but again, you can never defeat the mind. So all that myth that, I'm not gonna say it like that. I'm not on here to spread poison, but do know, the main line ain't what it's cracked out to be amongst people in general. Norteños, sureños. I don't know how bulldogs work to be sincere, but whites, blacks, and then you have those that favoritism. They're getting paid, so you can't. The paper is clear, but you can't say nothing. Those are the heartaches that I mention a lot. You go in with one type of mindset, and unfortunately, it don't work like that. There is no such thing as carnalismo in the system, especially right now where the pilis are out. You know, let me leave something with a question. A lot of people speak about generationals different, right? And those are facts. 80s are different than the 90s. 90s are different than mostly any era. Just being sincere with you. And now we have an era that the youngsters are all about money, not following orders. So tell me, what's gonna happen when they hit the system and they hit them with the amapile? Here's the 100 something rules and regulations just to follow to the dot. Hey, you got money coming? Break me off. You got canteen coming? Break me off. They go from pushing for money to someone always being in your pocket. And I said that with the utmost respect, for the new generation. It's just not cracked up to what it seems to be. I went through that, you could say, eye buster in real life. That's why I'm on here with the in look. But anyways, this was to answer on how is it possible that battles skate through the system amongst good camaradas. Well, I hope I was able to make sense. Again, I appreciate everyone's time, love, and support. Please stay true to yourself and loyal to loved ones.